We will go ahead and get started with today's PO monthly call. So on the agenda today, I wanted to give an update related to the A1C measure that we'll go over. Then wanted to just kind of recover the PCP VBR performance measures that we discussed at the PO collaborative web meeting, since we now are in the measurement year, and just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page and understands all the details of those fully. We'll have some brief updates on the 2025-2026 PCP scorecards. We'll talk a bit about the review and report schedule for the different measures. I want to touch on our learning community opportunities for this upcoming year, talk about what finalizing the VBR scores and eligible physicians will look like, and then go over the endocrinology and nephrology performance measure details as well. So related to the A1C measure, Blue Cross Blue Shield requested that we not set a specific target rate for this year's A1C measure until the updated HEDIS percentile rates are released in November. So the language on the PCP scorecard has been updated to reflect that. You can see below what that language looked like. It basically just takes out the reference to the 87% for Medicare and 70% for commercial, since we don't know what those new targets rate are. I completely understand that it can feel a little unsettling to begin a new measurement year without knowing what the target rate will be. So with this timeline, we're kind of tied into when HEDIS releases this information, but wanted to offer some reassurance related to that. So first and foremost, the performance across MCT2D practices continues to be exceptional. The vast majority of practices have been performing well above the 90th percentile mark for the last year of the performance measure. That gives us a strong sense of confidence heading into this measurement year. And then when the new benchmarks rates are released in November, like it says on this slide, we're going to be doing a full evaluation of the practice's performance. So we'll look at how many practices are already meeting the new rate and how many aren't. And if it turns out that the bar has meaningfully shifted, we're fully open to adjusting our scoring model. This could include incorporating improvement-based scoring or other fair approaches that reflect the work that's being done by your practices. The truth is we simply don't know yet what these new rates will be. It's very possible that they may not shift hardly at all. But I want to emphasize that regardless of the outcome, we will be fair, just like we've always been. So that's been a cornerstone of how we've tried to work with you, and that won't change. We'll keep the lines of communication open throughout this process. And once we have the updated benchmarks, we'll come back together to discuss what it means and how we will proceed. Before I move on, any questions, comments, concerns about this? And of course, feel free to put things in the chat as always. I'll continue to go through these slides just so we can get through everything, but please let us know if you have any comments. So as a reminder for the A1C measure for year 2, as we talked about at the collaborative wide meeting, we're doing things a little bit differently. So this is the eligible population. We've kept it limited to Blue Cross, Blue Care Network, and their Medicare Advantage plans. It's going to be including patients aged 18 and up to age 75. Any patient that meets the type 2 diabetes criteria for inclusion in the data registry and have had at least one A1C record between the start of the look back period, which is June 1st, 2024, and the end of the performance period, which is going to be April 30th, 2026. And all physicians at MCT2D participating practices that are deemed eligible for VBR by Blue Cross are eligible to participate in this measure. And the numerator, you'll see this will look the same. It's going to be the percentage of members who meet that criteria who have an A1C less than 8 for commercial and an A1C less than or equal to 9 for Medicare. The one change that we do have this year, or one of the changes, is that we now have this age limit on the measure. So when patients are 75 years old, they'll remain in the measure until they turn 76, and then they will drop out of the measure. For the final 2 months where we lock in the performance population, patients will be proactively dropped who will turn 76 before the end of the performance period. And so this is just a visual way to look at this timeline. So we have like our look back period, which starts 6/1/2024 to 5/31/2025. Again, this is to kind of confirm that they're an active patient and they've had an A1C during this period. And then this is where we're tracking performance, the 6/1/2025 to 4/30/2026. This is essentially the same timeline we had for the performance period that we just wrapped up, obviously a year previous. So we did it from 6/1/2024 to 4/30/2025. And that's because it aligns well with Blue Cross Blue Shield's payment cycle so that we can get those scores ready and over to them. And this is what the 2026 VBR performance measure will like be based off of, is just A1C, because we'll still be in that same performance period for UACR since it goes until August. And then both of these periods are going to be in the measurement period. So what that means is if a patient had an A1C sometime within this look back period, but weren't seen again during the performance period, the A1C they had in this period is going to be like counted as the one that's used for the measure. And these are the reports that we'll be disseminating to support this. So in August 2025, we're going to distribute the baseline reporting, though you should have a pretty good idea of your baseline once or like how your practices are doing generally once we release the final performance for this current year's VBR measure, which would be sometime this week. But we'll get you that official baseline report in August. Then we'll have a second report in November. This will have the initial 3 months of data for feedback, and we'll be able to update it with that new HEDIS target rate. Then in February 2026, we'll have a third report that'll cover 6 months of the measurement period. And then similar to our timeline for this year, in July of next year, we'll be releasing the final performance reporting with all of the months of the measurement year, and then be getting those final scores to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then these are the changes that we've made from how we did this last year. Again, we went over this a bit at the collaborative-wide meeting, but just want to make sure everyone is on the same page and fully understands this, since, you know, in addition to this measure, we also have the UACR one and the specialist performance measures for those of you that have specialists participating. So just want to make sure everything is crystal clear. So we added the upper age limit of 76 years so that it aligns directly with HEDIS. In the past year, we didn't include that. Previously, we didn't have a way in the dashboard to delineate commercial and Medicare patients, so we just used 65 years of age as kind of a proxy for that, but now we do specifically that information on if they're commercial or Medicare. We removed the aggregate groups, which hopefully makes things a little more streamlined and straightforward for your practices. In the performance measure details document, we went over like why we made that decision and the impacts that it has. We also removed the locking of the denominator until the last 2 months of the performance period. We're hoping that this means we don't see these really big drops and fluctuations like we saw this first year, like when practices combined or like things like that. So that will leave that a little more fluid. We also won't be providing a list of patients including in the measure because we're not locking that in. So we don't really like know exactly who is going to remain in the measure for the whole year. And we won't be able to do it even once we lock that denominator population, because we won't receive the data for those last 2 months until the end of the measurement period. So it won't be able to be added in a meaningful way. And we are going to be removing the additional requirement for practices currently meeting the measure to submit uncontrolled A1C forms. We feel like between working on this measure and the UACR one, that's enough on your practice's plate, and we wanted to remove some additional burden, so that will not be a requirement this year. Any questions on the A1C measure before I briefly run through the UACR one? Okay, again, this should hopefully all feel familiar from the collaborative-wide meeting, but the measurement year for UACR is going to be July 1st of this year through August 31st of next year. And then it won't be paid out until September 2027, just because the time frame of when this measure ends is when the data would already be due to Blue Cross Blue Shield as far as who's met and who hasn't. So we have to wait and have that be a little bit later on. And so what we're asking practices to do is do a 10% absolute improvement on their baseline rate. So if their baseline was 54.5%, their goal is 64.5%, and that's up to a rate of 90. So practices that are already starting with a baseline between 80 and 90, they only need to improve to 90%. So if they're at 85, they don't need to get to 95, they just need to get to 90. And then practices who have a baseline rate of above 90% will be asked to repeat that rate during the measurement year and to present at the fall regional meetings about like their process and approach to UACR testing and what's allowed them to be so successful. And the eligible population is, so Amanda, you'd asked what the reward for the UACR measure is. So it's the same as everything else. It's going to be included in the value-based reimbursement. The time frame of when it gets paid out is just a little bit different. So it won't be paid out until the 2027 VBR, whereas the A1C measure that the practices are working on because of when it ends will be paid out in the 2026 or 2020. Yeah, 2026 VBR. So it's just a little bit later because of that, but it's all going to be part of that 5% value-based reimbursement like bucket that is made up of like the performance and participation measures.
Jackie, there was another question that was sent to me directly, but I think that would be good to address for the group. The question was, are the 2024-2025 scorecards for continuing practices complete for the year, specifically the VBR performance measure? So are the scorecards themselves all completed on the admin portal?
So for the admin portal, we didn't have performance necessarily included as part of like the scorecard that's on the admin portal. The admin portal is just the participation measures that are on there. So for that part, yes, it's complete. So we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But if you look and you see any issues with that, please let us know because we're going to be close to finalizing those participation measures. For performance, if you have not already gotten an email from me telling you that one of your practices didn't meet performance, you've met performance. All your practices have. If you haven't heard from me, we've directly reached out to those who didn't. And we'll be distributing the final performance reporting later this week. We're taking one last look at verifying that all of the files are correct and kind of going from, and we'll be sending those out once we verify that those are good. So unless you've heard from me, your practices have met performance, and then what's on the admin portal is participation. And Kathy, you'd asked, curious how the 90% was determined. So we determined that by looking at like the performance across all of the different practices and like what the kind of distribution of that was across our different sites. And it also not wanting to like demand perfection of the practices, 90% felt like achievable since we have a good number of practices above that, but also fair. And then we vetted that with the steering committee as well to get the kind of sign off on the representatives from the collaborative that they felt okay about that. So that's how we set up the 90% target as far as like our kind of cap for what we're expecting practices to achieve. And again, the 90% isn't for everyone. It's a 10% improvement on where the practices started. So 90% is just kind of like we're not expecting anyone to go beyond that. And we'll keep monitoring the chat for questions as we go through this. And then for the UACR measure, what you'll see as a little bit different here is the age range. So this also aligns with HEDIS where it's 18 to 85 versus 75 for the A1C. Meet the MCT2D criteria for inclusion in the data registry and have at least one claim for any service in the 14-month baseline period so that we can know that we're receiving claims for that patient. And then any physician deemed eligible to earn VBR is eligible to participate in the PCP performance measure. And then the baseline rate is, or baseline period is January 1st, 2024 to February 28th, 2025. And the measurement period is 7/1/2025 to 8/31/2026. So we gave 14 months instead of the HEDIS, like 12 months, just because if a patient happened to not get in right at the end of that 12-month cap, but you saw them next month, like we wanted to make sure that we accounted for that little bit of like scheduling challenges there. So 14 months instead of 12. We've distributed the baseline reporting for this back in May to you as the POs. And then we also sent a newsletter in June to all of the clinical champions. We've posted the baseline data for the UACR measure on the admin portal. We're hoping that makes it a little easier on you to not have to distribute that individually to each of your practices and a little easier on them to be able to like locate that information versus having to like look through emails. So hopefully that's a little bit simpler on everyone where the practices are able to access that themselves if they have admin portal access. And I'd continue to encourage your practices if they don't have that to have it just so they can operate a little more independently and check into those things. Then we have our second report in October 25. This will just be 1 month of data because we want to share that initial report with you and see, is this helpful? Does it have the information that you need? Do you want edits to it so that when we distribute these next 3 reports, we can make sure that it's meeting all of your needs? So then we'll have reporting in March 2026, August 2026, and then the very final report in February 2027. And then we talked about there will be a bit of that gap until that's included in the VBR payments beginning in September 2027. Any other questions on the UACR measure before we move on? Okay, a couple other things related to the PCP scorecard before we touch on the specialist measures. 1 second. Will you have patient lists available? So no, since we're not locking the denominator population, we won't be sharing specific patient lists, like either for the A1C or the UACR measures. What we will be doing though is be giving guidance on how to use like the MDC dashboards to be able to pull some of this information. So for example, under the renal details filter on the dashboard, we already have like patients who have or haven't received a UACR within like a certain time frame. So we'll be sharing how to like use the dashboard to find some of the information that's actionable for your practices. So we're going to be offering in this upcoming VBR year, like some bonus or extra credit points for PCP practices who complete both their physician level learning community requirement with 90 to 100% of physicians completing it and their practice level learning community requirement by January 1st, 2026. This is in no way a requirement. That's why it's extra credit points. So no one has to do this, but these points can be used to increase a practice's score up to 100 points. So if they lose a little bit of points on one of the other measures, they're able to kind of recoup some of those if they're able to complete these requirements earlier than the due date. So this is just an option that we hope will be helpful for some of the practices to just have a little bit of extra security there with the scores and to remove some of the administrative burden at the end of the year, likely both for you and for us of trying to get everyone to complete these by the final deadline. And as it says here, these points can be used to increase a practice's score up to 100 points, but if they go over 100 points, they're not going to receive additional value-based reimbursement. It's going to be that 5%, but these can be used to make up points lost for other areas. So the 2025-2026 PCP scorecard is going to have 4 measures. So regional meeting attendance, the physician and practice level learning community requirements, and the A1C control measure. Another area of note is that the PO learning community requirement is no longer included like on the practice scorecards or related to the value-based reimbursement. It will only be part of the PO scorecard moving forward. The reason for that is the reason that we put it into the VBR initially is because that was prior to us having PO scorecards and being able to include it on there. So we kind of had this year where we had them on both and then realized it might make more sense to just have that on the PO scorecard and not have it be a component of the practice level one. So that'll be related to the PO scorecards and the reimbursement you receive for that moving forward. And then as we've said and noted here too, so the UACR measure that practices are working on isn't included in this because the scorecards are retrospective and reimbursement for that one will begin on 9/1/2027. And then one other reminder that we covered at the collaborative wide meeting, but beginning with this next VBR cycle, Blue Cross Blue Shield isn't separating participation and performance. So it used to be 3% would be performance and 2% participation or vice versa. Whereas now there is just one scorecard. It equals 100 points, and then there's these different thresholds. So you still see that 102%, 103%, 105%, but it's not like you can earn it in one area versus another. It's just these straight points. So 55 to 70 is 102% VBR, 70 to 85 is 103% VBR, and any practice that gets more than 85 points will have that 105% VBR. So same concept, just shifting a little bit how it's done. And then finally, the last thing related to the PCP scorecard. So our team right now is in the process of reviewing and revamping the different learning community options offered. We want to expand and change some of the options available, especially at the PO and practice level. We're going to be reviewing each of the current options and considering if we want to keep it, amend it, or remove it if it's not really meeting the needs of the collaborative. And then we'll go over all of the options on the August PO call and share it with the collaborative prior to the VBR year start. We're also trying to think of ways to make it easier for you to communicate and share these with your practices too. So we're hoping to do a little bit of re-envisioning how we list these on the portal and on the website. Hopefully come up with some email templates for you to be able to send out. So hoping to just streamline this and make it easier on you and your sites. And then finally, I've mentioned that you'd already been notified if any of your practices did not meet the performance measure. So if you have not heard from me, you are good. That's worth 2% of the VBR. The participation measures are scored in the admin portal. If your practice has received a score of above 80 points, you'll receive the 3% VBR. If they did both, they'll get that full 5%. And please, if you can, review the participation scores. If you have any questions or issues, notify us ASAP. And then, well, it's already a little bit late, but now we're hoping to receive the PGIF list today on the 14th, is what I've been updated. But once we get the PGIF list from Blue Cross Blue Shield, we'll be doing what we've did in previous years and generating a list of all of your physicians who will be submitted to Blue Cross Blue Shield to earn VBR for the next performance year. Instead of in the past where it's just these are the list of names of physicians, we're also going to have like the percent VBR that we have them earning. So 2, 3, or 5%, depending on like the participation performance or both. We're calculating performance at a practice level. So if you have a physician who is newly eligible to earn VBR, like maybe last year they weren't in the PGIP list for that full time, they'll be receiving the VBR rate of their practice, which will be dependent on the scores. And so, as always, there's a quick turnaround with this list as far as when Blue Cross Blue Shield needs it back to be able to get everything ready for that September payment date start. So it will likely be about a week that we're able to give you to review that and sign off on that. So like I said, as soon as we get the PGIP list, we will try to get that out to you as quickly as possible. And then just very briefly with these last few minutes, wanted to go over the endocrinology and nephrology VBR measures. So the endocrinology VBR measure is going to be based on CGM interpretation. You'll note that it's the same performance measurement period as the UACR measure for PCPs. It's also the same as the nephrology UACR measure. We're trying to simplify this and have it be as the same as possible where we could keep it that way. So for 3 of the measures is that same measurement year and baseline rate. So this is a practice level measurement. It will begin getting paid out on 3/1/2027 to the sites. What we're asking is for each practice to achieve a 5% improvement on their baseline rate for billing for 95251, the CGM interpretation code for patients who have been prescribed a CGM. So our thought with that is if a patient is on a CGM, we want them to be getting like the support and guidance around like the interpretation of that data. So that's why we've included that as a measure. And that 5% improvement is up to the collaborative wide 95th percentile benchmark of 89.59%. So similar to the others, if a practice is already within that 5% range, they still only need to improve up to the collaborative wide target. And then those that are above it are just going to be asked to maintain that through the current measurement year. For this eligibility, any patient over 18 who has met inclusion in the data registry requirements and have had 1 claim for a CGM device within the 12-month CGM baseline period is eligible to be in this measure. And any endocrinologist who is part of a continuing practices. So we had some brand new practices start in 2025. We're not having them work on the performance measure. They'll be included in next year's performance measure, but all of the other endocrinology practices will be working on this. And then we're looking at the number or the percentage of eligible patients who have had at least 1 95251 billing claim within the 14-month period as far as how we're measuring that. Final baseline data was determined based on the April 2025 refresh. And then we have a little bit different baseline measurement period. So you'll see that kind of 2-month lag where we're hoping that, if they prescribed a CGM, they've been gotten in to see interpretation or gotten into the doctor for the interpretation piece afterwards. So CGM device claims, the baseline is through December 31st, and then the billing code baseline is through the end of February. And our intervention periods are listed here. So you'll note that after 6:30, we're not keeping track of any new CGM devices. And then we have that additional 2 months for those patients to be seen and have that 95251 code billed. And the reporting for this, we sent out the baseline reports today, July 14th, like right up to the start of this meeting, we were sending those out. So all of those have been distributed. This has all of the baseline data. We sent these to the endocrinology clinical champions and practice liaisons, as well as the PO leads and primary contacts. You'll see a similar reporting schedule as for the PCP UACR measure. So we'll have a second report in October with 1 month of data with the hopes of getting feedback on that reporting and how it can be more useful. And then additional reporting in March, August, and then January because the final BCBSM reporting for who has met the measure is due in January. And for sake of time, I'm going to move right on to the nephrology one, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Again, you'll see that same measurement time frame listed here. The only thing that's forgot to fix on this slide is the reward year is going to be the same as the endocrinology one and will align with the specialist VBR year that should be 3/1/2027 to 2/28/2028. This is very, very similar to the PCP measure, except we're looking for a 5% absolute improvement on the baseline rate up to a rate of 90%. These other things still hold where 85 to 90 will only be asked to improve up to 90, and then others will just be asked to anyone above will be asked to maintain that during the measurement year. The criteria is the same as well as the PCP UACR. It aligns with HEDIS with that 18 to 85. We have met the inclusion criteria for the dashboard and have had at least one claim in the 14-month baseline. And then all of the nephrology practices are eligible since we didn't have any new practices joining this year. So they're all participating in the performance measure. A question of when we'll have these slides available. After today's meeting, Peggy will get one of the recordings posted and we'll post the slides with those like we always do. So I'll make this quick change to the one thing I mentioned that needs to be fixed with the measurement year, and then they'll be posted along with the recording to the meeting. So same with this, we'll have people proactively drop out of the measure if they're going to be aged out of it. Baseline period and measurement period is the exact same as the PCP UACR, January 1st, 2024 to the end of February 2025, and then the measurement period of July 1st to the end of August next year. Same thing, we sent out that baseline reporting already. We distributed in May, same as the endocrinology. We emailed the clinical champions and practice liaisons at each practice and copied the PO, admin leads, and primary contacts. Same reporting schedule as the endocrinology measure. So 1 month of data we'll have available in October. We'll have our next reporting in then March, August, and January with that final reporting due to Blue Cross in mid-July. And that is it. We got through everything with 1 minute left. Next month's PO calls are going to be Monday, August 11th, and then Wednesday, August 13th. And like we said, a major focus of that will be going over how we're going to be revamping and changing some of those learning community event options to hopefully meet your needs and your practice's needs a little bit better. And that is all we had. Any final questions before we hand it over to Inhale? All right.